Das ist das Schlafzimmer von der Marie-Louise von Franz. Good evening, everybody. I was just talking in my Swiss dialect, which is close to German, but Germans don't understand our dialect. Marie-Louise von Franz also was talking in Swiss dialect. This is her house. This was her house. Now my wife and I are living in this house, and I'm sitting on the top, on the upper floor on the left-hand side, and talk now with you. Four months before Marie-Louise von Franz died, I had an impressive dream about her death. It was October the 12th, 1997. I told her about this dream at our last meeting shortly before Christmas in 1997, on December the 3rd. At that time, she lay in bed, already badly marked because of her long-term illness. When I depicted the dream to her, she looked at me very seriously for a long time. Because of her illness, speaking was difficult for her, which is why I had become accustomed to her silence. However, this time it was especially meaningful. She offered me a brief yet impressive comment, which I will read to you at the end of my lecture. Needless to say, I'm aware that the dream contains a personal message for me, but the unconscious portrays in my dream an image of Marie-Louise von Franz, which I would like to share with you. It shows aspects of her personality which were important for the unconscious. Hence, these are not only my personally tinted views, but this image also has its objective qualities. First, I would like to share my dream with you. This is the dream. I am standing in the middle of high mountains, on a slightly wooded shoulder of the terrain. A couple of steps in front of me, a steep wall of rock falls down into an open valley, such that to the left of me, a narrow gorge opens. To the right, a vigorously fresh fall wind blows through the valley down from the mountains, jams on the gorge, and sails past me in powerful gusts and goes high above me up to the face of the rock. The gusts of wind steer up many leaves out of the valley. One of these blasts of wind carries off a cloth from the back of the valley toward the sky. As this cloth spins past me, it unfolds itself in its complete size. A deep red square cloth measuring approximately 20 by 20 meters with a white equal armed cross in the middle. A Swiss flag of large dimension. In that moment, it became clear to me that is the soul of Marie-Louise von Franz, who at this moment had died in the back of the valley. Her soul is headed past me towards the sky in the shape of a powerful Swiss flag. As I gaze after this disappearing flag, not sad, but overwhelmed from this natural event, the vivacious Marie-Louise von Franz stands next to me, abruptly and quite naturally. Everything that she had once told me about the Swiss flag occurs to me again in this moment. As a worldwide unique country flag, the Swiss flag is a square. The red background points to life's unavoidable suffering, and the white cross points to a possible solution through the uniting of the opposites. Hence, the Swiss flag depicts a mandala which symbolizes the conjunctio oppositorum, the coming together of the opposites. After the earlier conversation with Marie-Louise von Franz about the flag came into my mind, she adds quite seriously but decisively, yes, and the only power that can bring the opposites together is love. So much for the dream. As mentioned, I will share with you the brief commentary which Marie-Louise von Franz provided about it at the end of my presentation. The dream begins in the mountains. I'm standing high above the valley. At the far end of the valley, Marie-Louise von Franz had died. Mountains are near to the heavens, which means that in the mountains, heaven and earth touch each other. Therefore, holy mountains are to be found in many countries, like, for example, Mount Olympus in Greece. Prophets like Moses received their messages from God on a mountain, and Abraham wanted to sacrifice his son Isaac to God on a mountain. When I asked the bushman in the Kalahari where the heavens begin, he answered, there where the earth ends, right on the top of the tree or at the top of the rock. Therefore, the Tsodilo Hills in the Kalahari Desert in Botswana are holy mountains, where even today the gods can be experienced. When we were visiting the Tsodilo Hills years ago and wanted to erect our tents, such heavy winds were blowing for a short time that we desisted from what we were doing. The mountain where we wanted to camp is referred to as a feminine mountain. According to the legend, the moon goddess lives there, where she rests during the day. The next morning, we asked the bushman woman about the meaning of these gusts. She said calmly, sometimes our gods greet the visitors like this. Here the mountains and the winds belong together, for quite frequently can the wind be experienced in the mountains. In Hebrew, the word for wind is ruach, with which latter the word spirit is designated. Then later also air or breath. According to the old tradition, ruach is construed as the spirit of God. The wind blows where it will, and you hear its rushing, but you don't know from whence it comes and to where it goes. We read in the Gospel of John. When Marie-Louise von Franz passed away in the mountains, she was close to the world of the gods there. And the Spirit of God takes her soul up to him in the heavens, which means he took her soul to him in the form of a Swiss flag. I want to remind you of the dream Marie-Louise von Franz had in her early childhood, in which she had decided courageously to confront the gods who wanted to visit her. Psychologically speaking, Marie-Louise von Franz was connected to the archetypal world in a special way and was therefore oriented and sharply focused on this world. The forest where I was standing also points to this archetypal world, in which we both are standing at the end of my dream. The vast forest is an image of the unconscious in a particular way. It is known to us in close proximity, unknown to us in its depth. It nourishes us with berries and mushrooms, but it also is dangerous because of the wild animals and the poisonous mushrooms. We can become lost in it or discover its treasure. The forest grows continuously without our being aware of it. The forest is a symbol of the ambivalent unconscious that is constantly growing, renewing itself, and expanding. Jung compares the forest with the mysterious spiritual growth which takes place in every human life during a lifetime. The archetypal world is in constant movement and renewal and regulates itself. Marie-Louise von Franz was characterized by her close relationship to this aspect of the unconscious in the following way. Whenever she interpreted a dream, she amplified and interpreted first and foremost the archetypal symbols. She tried to make the archetypal structures visible and tried to extrapolate the final aspect, which means where does the dreams point to. The archetypes regulate our individual life like the life of the society, because they are always shared with a community of people. Or as Jung expressed it, the primordial image, elsewhere also termed archetype, is always collective. It is at least common to entire peoples or epochs. At the same time, Marie-Louise von Franz never forgot to connect the dream to the specific situation of the dreamer as a specific message about the here and now from the perspective of the unconscious. The mountains where Marie-Louise von Franz comes from in my dream have even a wider aspect. There the peasants live, the woodcutters, the alpine herdsmen and dairymen, and shepherds with their wives and children in a more archaic world than the people in the cities. Less divided into an inner and an outer life. Nature is alive with dwarfs, spirits and demons, elves and souls of the dead. Christianity could spread into the Alps only in a limited way. That is expressed in manifold legends. I will give you an example from the Swiss mountains. A mountain farmer who never went to church on Sunday was rebuked and summoned to appear in the church service the following Sunday. The farmer came somewhat earlier and entered the church without removing his hat from his head. The clergyman demanded that he take off his hat. The farmer obeyed his command and hung his hat on a beam of sunlight that penetrated the church window in this moment. With great respect, the clergyman told the visitors, "This man doesn't need the church service, since he is obviously capable of more than everybody else, including myself." The people in the mountains are still embedded in the circular flow of nature and are integrated in a manner which has been necessary for the successful survival from time immemorial, especially since we roamed during thousands of years as hunters and gatherers through the steppes and the forests. Marie-Louise von Franz told a friend of mine once, "If there is such a thing as reincarnation, I want to be reborn as a peasant farmer in the mountains." Here it is noted that Marie-Louise von Franz was born as a baroness and by birth belonged to the low nobility of Austria. This proximity to the mentality of the people in the mountains, where she spent many of her vacations, until she was quite old, also probably made it possible for her to write an impressive commentary on the visions of our national saint, Nikolaus von Flüe, which is going to be published for the first time next year, who was a peasant farmer from the Swiss mountains before he became a hermit. Brother Klaus, as we call him, lived in the 15th century. It was a dismal century, in which the belief in a benevolent and a compassionate God was seriously placed in doubt. In one of his visions, he saw the awesome countenance of God, which shook him profoundly. Midway through these uncertain times in which the contrasts in every aspect of life were exacerbated and the people were in need of new sparks of hope, Niklaus von Kues, named Cusanus, a contemporary of Niklaus von Flüe, was born in Germany. On a trip in 1438, as papal ambassador, a guiding principle of his philosophy was revealed to him. Everything lives and moves through the coinciding of the opposites. Such a coincidentia oppositorum is God himself. Also, every human being is a coincidentia oppositorum, because he embodies all the opposites in himself: mortality and immortality, body and soul, animality and divinity, brutality and love. Cusanus himself was a condensia oppositorum. I quote, a very reflective preserver of the ancient and a passionate herald of the new, man of the world and seeker of God, heretic and cardinal, the last scholastic, and the first modern. End of quote. This is a quote from Marie-Louise von Franz, by the way. In my dream, Marie-Louise von Franz points to this experience of the opposites. They are necessary and have to remain so that energy can flow. Only selectively and temporarily can they be united, and indeed through love, as she emphasizes. Jung dedicated 2 volumes of his works to the mysterious conjunctio of the opposites, mysterium conjunctionis. Marie-Louise von Franz wrote the commentary to a text which she attributed to Thomas of Aquino, Aurora Consurgens. And this, in the German edition, was the 3rd volume of Mysterium Conjunctionis. She was, by the way, the only collaborator who wrote a whole works. In the dream, she correlates her commentary to suffering and love. This is Jung and his Mysterium Conjunctionis, and the 3rd volume in German was written by Marie-Louise von Franz. In the dream, she correlates her commentary to suffering and love, or to the suffering in love. When I had to tell her about the crucial experience in my life that I had fallen in love with a married woman unexpectedly, she reacted meaningfully with the words, "Now you will learn lots about Jung psychology." I can assure you that Marie-Louise von Franz was correct. She was obviously speaking from her own experience. We know nothing further about her experience in this matter. Once I brought up the biography of C.G. Jung, which was greatly valuable in order to understand his work better, and I asked her why she had not written her own biography. Her reaction was clear. She said, "A man must explain and substantiate his own spiritual path. A woman's journey through life is determined by love, and that is her private matter." That was her short answer she gave to me. With that statement, the matter was settled, and I did not have the courage to ask more. She confided in a friend of mine that she had only really loved one man in her life, and he had not been available to her. I don't want to speculate more, but consequently, we have at least the certainty that she knew exactly what she was talking about. Marie-Louise von Franz was more connected to her totality than others, where psyche and matter meld into a common background, which manifest themselves in meaningful coincidences, in the intuitive knowledge and the connection to the absolute knowledge, as Jung describes it. We could also speak about the mysterious order, which is transcendent to consciousness. Marie-Louise von Franz had access to it over and over again. I experienced this phenomena in the following example. In one of my dreams, I cooked for her and prepared a dessert for her, which she especially loved, namely poire belle-Hélène. She was happy in the dream, and as thanks offered me to address her with her first name, Marie-Louise. At this moment, I had called her Miss Dr. von Franz. I took this dream into my next hour analysis. I entered her room. Before I could greet her, she said to me, "From now on, please call me Marie-Louise." Flabbergasted, I told her my dream. After that, she just laughed. She was absolutely informed about something in a mysterious way. She was obviously informed about something in a mysterious way, which, observed rationally, she could not know. Her precise intuition astounded me again and again. When we pay attention to the manifestations of our own unconscious, that is not just an ego trip, but on the contrary, we connect to a layer in the unconscious to which we are all connected. This layer Jung calls the collective unconscious. There, the sharp differences between psyche and matter also merge, which is why Jung also called this sphere psychoid, and the alchemists characterized it with the Latin concept unus mundus. In her book on projections, Marie-Louise von Franz wrote, I quote, that in the deepest layers of the unconscious, the psyche knows itself in the mirror of the cosmic world, and the matter knows itself in the mirror of the objective psyche. But this knowledge is absolute in the sense that for our ego, it is almost completely consciousness transcending. End of quotation. How can she know it when it transcends consciousness? Because she was connected to the absolute knowledge or with the mysterious order of the background world. She wrote a book about this important aspect with the title On Divination and Synchronicity. In addition, there is a collection of 12 essays by Marie-Louise von Franz entitled Psyche and Matter. This aspect is also visible in my dream. Her soul is represented by a large cloth, by a fabric made out of single threads. A cloth or a fabric stands symbolically for fate, which is composed of many different threads. Our individual purpose is to weave or to arrange the many threads of our life into something whole, into something complete. Marie-Louise von Franz was clearly successful in doing so. Her soul is not only symbolized by the common Swiss flag, but the flag is gigantic, which means that it is visible from afar. The personal appeal of her soul, visible in her books and essays, and able to make these ideas come alive, finds recognition worldwide. Here's a couple of new editions of the German books she wrote. Her works have been translated totally into 23 languages and have been published in numerous editions. Every year, new translations and publications are added to the extensive list. On her 106th birthday at the 4th of January 2021. The first volume of her collected work in English was published by Chiron, Asheville, North Carolina. Archetypal Symbols in Fairy Tales. You might have. I can tell you good news. A Russian editor wants to publish the collected works of Marie-Louise von Franz in Russian. We just got into contact with an editor in Moscow. On the one hand, the image of her soul as flag. This is her first volume of her collected work in English. On the one hand, the image of her soul as flag is visible in matter, and on the other hand, the flag represents an abstract mandala. The image for her soul is both concrete material and as abstract symbolic. In the dream, it is that which is for me visible after her death, and to a certain degree, the immortal part of her personality. Her soul appears as a mandala, strengthens my opinion as she died as a complete personality, which means that she reached her optimum in spiritual maturity. Expressed in Jungian terminology, she left this world as an individuated personality. Switzerland is a country in which opposites are on the one hand clearly visible, and on the other hand could be held together until today by a political system that has developed over centuries. In Switzerland, 4 languages are spoken, officially German, French, Italian, and Romansh. The people in the 4 geographic regions also represent different mentalities. Since the Reformation, Catholics and Protestants live together, the longer the more peaceful. The difference between the pre-Alps and the Alps, between the city and country, is also a contrast between extraversion and introversion, between progress and tradition, between rich and poor, between changing and preserving powers. Decisions of the federation, cantons, townships, and communities are based upon a direct democracy, which guarantee to the individual person the greatest possible voice and the right to vote. In my dream, the Swiss flag stands therefore as an image for individuality, which on the one hand holds the opposites together, and on the other hand, as an individual is autonomous as well and integrated into the collective. In a simple way, we could say the Swiss flag represents a spiritual totality in which all the aspects of the psyche cooperate meaningfully. Individuation means literally to be undivided. The flag itself is a sign that expresses a belonging to a group, but also depicts the center of the group, central value, which holds the group together. When battles had been fought in earlier times, the warrior always carried a flag with him, defended this all out. If the flag fell into the hands of the enemy, the battle was as good as lost. When the battle had been successful, everybody knew that it was the energy of the flag that made it possible. Therefore, the flag is also an appropriate symbol of the self, which means both the comprehensive whole and the center of the psyche. To me, Marie-Louise von Franz belongs to those extraordinary and rare human beings who achieved in their lives a spiritual wholeness. In my opinion, this fact stands behind the enduring luminosity of her work. At the same time, she remained modest. For the authorities, she was registered up unto her death as Miss Marie-Louise von Franz, Latin teacher. But she was at the beginning of her life. of her adult life. I asked Marie-Louise von Franz on an occasion, what is the most dangerous shadow of Jungian psychology? Without hesitation, she named inflation, the delusion of grandeur, which threatens every person. It is easy for the ego to identify with the wisdom of the unconscious, instead of meeting the unconscious with thankfulness, reverence, respect, and humbleness. I asked further how Jung himself could avoid inflation in spite of his deep insights into the unconscious and his worldwide successes. She said, Jung always took along, also on his lecture tours, a difficult text which he tried to understand. In that way, he remained modest, for he had paid attention to difficult problems because it makes us as unconscious. Inflated people are only interested in themselves, in their own past, their own present, and their own future. What remains is an inflated ego with a relationship to one's environment and to one's fellow human beings. Consequently, conjures up the danger of paranoia. From the contemporary political situations of the world, also in the US, many examples could be cited. Marie-Louise von Franz stands directly next to me in my dream. That means that her spirit still remains alive. We have to ask, what is the most essential aspect of her spirit? The answer is not difficult for me. Her uninterrupted curiosity up into her death and her never-failing creativity, and above all, her faithfulness to the unconscious. I experienced that concretely in my analytical hours with her, where she had astounded me over and over again with her seriousness and her original interpretations of my dreams. In the process, she often let herself be led by her independent objective feeling. Once I dreamed that I dropped off my 4-year-old daughter on the beach in order to untangle the sails on my ship. When I was finally successful after many difficult tries in strong offshore winds and rough seas, I was already situated so far from the beach that I could no longer take my daughter on board. I had to leave her back on the shore. So much to dream. With a heavy heart, I told Marie-Louise von Franz this dream, convinced that I had made a big mistake. But she laughed at me and was happy that I had left behind my childish tendencies and finally was embarking on a journey. Her unsentimental interpretation convinced me immediately. Example of her unabated curiosity. One of my last meetings with Marie-Louise von Franz is unforgettable. She was lying in bed in the Tower of Bollingen and was weak and kept shivering from cramps. After 10 minutes, I wanted to take leave because I believed that she needed rest. I felt very sorry for her that she had to suffer so much from this terrible illness. She held me back and said with a shaking voice, "My illness is very interesting. I knew how my cerebrum functions. With the increasing failures in the other regions of the brain, I'm now learning much about those centers, how those centers function, which are connected to the body." Jesus had not experienced since he had to die so young. Made the same experiences. In my opinion, creativity was the most important thing to her. Above all, her own creativity. But with unrelenting rigor, she also urged all of her analysants to be creative. As one of her analysants could not finish his thesis at the Jung Institute, despite numerous dreams which were urging him to write, she kicked him out of analysis with the instruction that he could come back after he had written 10 pages. She added, "Then I will take you back for an hour of analysis for free." Her own creativity was extraordinary. She published approximately 20 books, numerous essays, and gave many interviews which were published in part. After her studies in classical philosophy, philology, with majors in Latin and Greek, she wrote her first major work. In this work, she interpreted over 1,000 fairy tales from the perspective of human psychology. Her numerous lectures and her books about fairy tales were based on this immense work. To compare and to interpret fairy tales parallels a fundamental method of the classical sciences, on which the modern theory of evolution is based. In analogy, we could call it comparative anatomy of the psyche. With her interpretations, Marie-Louise von Franz dissected the fundamental structure of the collective psyche and discovered more and more the mysterious working of the archetypes in connection to and as an answer to the collective consciousness. Jung's discoveries of the collective psyche were groundbreaking for her. Connect with her own experiences in a creative way and pushed open many a door which Jung had opened before. In a brilliant way, she could make the effect of archetypal energies clear and understandable in everyday life. Her work about the archetypal meaning of the first four numbers, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and its relationship to time appeared under the title Number and Time, and is based on a few fundamental reflections which inspired Jung and which Jung spoke about with her. Numbers represent the ordering aspect of the collective unconscious and not only have a quantitative meaning, like in mathematics, but also have a qualitative meaning, generally known today by the number 13, commonly known as a synonym for bad luck. Her brief amicable relationship with Wolfgang Pauli had made her access to mathematics and physics easy. Her last essay, she interpreted an alchemical text which an Arab alchemist, Ibn Umayl, had written in the 10th century. I appreciate above all her introduction about the aspect of Eros in the original Islam. She held her last public lecture in 1986 on the topic C.G. Jung's rehabilitation of the feeding function in our civilization. In many meetings with Marie-Louise von Franz, it appeared to me as though she had been more receptive to feelings between human beings in the course of her suffering. In the beginning, she was for me a friendly, strict, and spiritual teacher with an unbelievable knowledge and an amazing ability to think symbolically. She herself defines symbolic thinking as, I quote, an art of loving understanding, a light which does not drive away the god of Eros, end of quotation. Later, she became for me more and more a wise female friend. This was Wolfgang Pauli. He analyzed with Marie-Louise von Franz a couple of years, and they had a kind of a friendship. Her spirit remained curious and creative. Her humor was unbroken, When already very ill in 1990, she writes in a letter, I quote, "There are a lot of attacks to ruin my work. I'm fighting like a tiger." End of quote. And in one of her last letters towards the end of her life, she writes, "I'm still alive, battling with the paradoxes." End of quote. She was the animated embodiment of the essence of Jungian psychology, and as a result, opened for me direct access to Jung, because she was allowed to accompany C.G. Jung for almost 3 decades. In a dream, I passed by Jung's house in Küsnacht and visited his tower in Berlin. Her commentary: "Now you have to get to know the unofficial Jung, as he is discernible in his seminars and letters. He goes beyond his official writings." And she said, in his personal conversations, he went even much further. I often ask myself what Jung or von Franz would probably think today about this or that. We have to be able to give these answers. Now I'm coming to an end of my memories and reflections and want to speak about the commentary which Marie-Louise von Franz gave after she had heard my dream. She grasped my hand and thanked me first for this dream, which surprised me. Her thankfulness referred to the comment of my unconscious, which gave her hope. She said, "The dream gives me courage and confidence, for I was depressed and in despair for a long time. Only something archaic from the mountains can save us. The spirit of Jung cannot be allowed to perish. Switzerland will be able to remain a small world of itself, in which the spirit is held high and the development of consciousness can continue to grow, even in the middle of barbaric countries." How can we describe the spirit of Jung, which cannot be allowed to perish in the midst of barbaric people? With great empathy, Marie-Louise von Franz wrote a book entitled C.G. Jung, His Myth in Our Time. She writes that probably Jung's greatest accomplishment is the discovery of the existence of the collective unconscious as an autonomous, creative mother soil of the normal psychic life. What is actually the unconscious, which in Jung's life and works played such a huge, immeasurable role? Marie-Louise von Franz asked herself in her book and gives an answer herself. I quote from her book about Jung. "Actually," she said, "it is just a modern technical expression for an inner experience which is as old as mankind. The experience which occurs when something alien and unknown overwhelms us from within, when the working of inner forces suddenly changes our lives, when we have dreams or inspirations or hunches which we know we have not made up, but which come to us from a psychic outside and push their way into consciousness. In earlier times, these effects of unconscious processes were ascribed to a divine fluid, or a mana, or to a god, or a daemon, or a spirit. Such names gave expression to the feeling of an objective, alien, and autonomous presence, as well as to a sense of something overwhelming to which the conscious ego has to submit." So far, the quotation of Marie-Louise von Franz. In every normal spiritual life, the unconscious can be experienced as autonomous creative mother soul, as a spirit, which is often stronger than one's own ego. This fact has been known since time immemorial, and people established an honest and serious relationship to the unconscious through rites, dances, songs, religious activities of all kinds, like prayers, meditations, intercessory prayers, intercessions, offerings, etc. People discovered long ago that such a relationship was helpful in everyday life. Since the time of enlightenment, around 1500 years ago, this knowledge got more and more tangled up in the background and was replaced through the scientific elite by a sober, rational, mechanical, scientific way of reflections. The success of this new intellectual attitude is indisputable. Through this way of viewing the world, the soul, or expressed in a modern way, the unconscious, became ultimately an epiphenomenon of the brain and lost its recognition as an autonomous creative mother soul. That corresponds to a huge inflation of the collective Western consciousness that cuts off its connection from its roots. Jung's discoveries and insights will not perish when sufficient individual people endeavor honestly and seriously to recognize and consider the effects of their own unconscious. One does not need to have read the works of Jung and von Franz and much less be able to quote from their works. Every individual who acknowledges the manifestation of his own unconscious, his soul, carries forward the torch for the spirit of Carl Gustav Jung and Marie-Louise von Franz. Thus, one is connected to ancient knowledge of mankind, which can be understood in a modern way and can shine the light on creative ways into the future. Hence, essentially, a religious understanding is, in a sense, part of Jungian psychology, as Jung defined it himself. I quote Jung, an attitude which accepts the non-rational and incomprehensible simply because it is what is happening. Lastly, Marie-Louise von Franz told me, I'm not afraid of death, and I've not been afraid of death for a long time. We experience life and death as something fundamentally different, but basically it is one and the same. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Etter, for a very moving lecture. I love this last image of the tower, von Franz tower, behind the flowers. It's beautiful.
Let's make a break for 10 minutes. Then we can perhaps come back to questions and perhaps I can give some answers or comments. Okay?
Let's get back at 11:07.
Okay. See you then.
We're going to start the Q&A portion of this lecture. So if you would like to ask a question, please raise your hand virtually and I'm going to take the questions by order of appearance. So, well, if you would like to ask a question, please raise your hand. I may have a question actually inspired by the title of your lecture. I'm wondering if there is an autobiographical text of Marie-Louise von Franz talking about her own life, or something like Memories, Dreams, and Reflections that Jung wrote, co-wrote with someone else, with Hansueli F.
I said in my lecture that I asked her once why she doesn't write her own biography. And she said to me, a man has to explain his spiritual way. Mm-hmm. But for a woman, it's a matter of love. And that's her private affair. And that's why she will never do it. It's amazing that we don't have a biography of her. We don't have a biography of Barbara Hanna. We don't have a biography of Tony Wolff, for example. We don't have a biography of Emma Jung, not even Emma Jung. So all these women who were close to Jung didn't write a biography. And I think the main reason is that they should have, if she would have written a biography, they should have written about her relation to Jung, which is her private matter.
Thank you. Evie, would you like to unmute yourself?
Hi, thank you so much. I really, really enjoyed the lecture. It was awesome. But I guess that I was confused when you said that, and then when you said it again, I just don't understand what you mean by, or what she meant by for the woman, it's a matter of love. I don't understand what that means. So I was hoping you could clarify.
She wants, I can't remember where she writes it, but she writes that if a man or a woman is in love, he is at his best. And when we are doing a creative work, and we're doing it, of course, in relation to the unconscious, then it should be a love affair with the unconscious.
Oh, okay. I'm gonna have to still think about it, but that
and when the creative work is a love affair, we constantly think about it. We have it always in mind.
Yeah.
We go to sleep with it, and we wake up in the morning, and the whole day it's in our minds. And this is a kind of a love affair, and that's what the creative work should be. She wants, I mean, I'm trained as a natural scientist, and when I was doing research in natural sciences, it was clear that first of all, you had to do research on what is written about a certain topic. And then you have to summarize it, and then you have to ask the one crucial question which is left for you, and then you have to explain how you do the research to answer this question. And she said, I do it in a different way, completely different way. She said to me, I just start to write about a topic. I just start and see what's coming out of myself, and looking at my dreams and all the ideas I have. Where are they coming from? They're coming from the unconscious. Mm. So I just doing my work together with my unconscious in a kind of loving relationship. And when it's finished, right? I mean, we never know when a creative work is finished. We can only have the comments of the unconscious because it's never finished. But we have the comments of the unconscious, which perhaps says, now it's enough. And then she said, in a second, then I have my text, she said. And then I go through the text and I add all the scientific quotes. to make it scientific. But the basic work is a collaboration between consciousness and the unconscious.
Awesome, thank you.
And it's not just an intellectual contact, it's a loving affair.
Steve, would you like to unmute yourself?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for this lecture. After Jung, von Franz, and Erich Neumann were my primary figures that I read when I was first training. So I really appreciate greater insight into who she was. I have one kind of, I guess, a technical question. In Jung's, if I remember correctly, many years ago, reading the introduction to Psychology and Alchemy, Jung mentioned that the dreams he was going to talk about were from a student or colleague, I can't remember which word he used. And then right now when you're talking, it sounded like that the dreams came from Pauli's work with von Franz. And then also somewhere I read, I know that Pauli and Jung had some relationship, and somewhere I read that maybe Jung also worked a bit with Pauli's dreams. So I don't know if you can clarify your knowledge of that process.
I think he writes that the dreams are from a scientist, and in psychology and alchemy, and I think we know that there were dreams of Pauli. But I don't know if von Franz also was publishing dreams of Pauli. I don't know that.
Well, supposedly in the book, it says that these dreams were sent to Jung from the student,
yes,
or the colleague.
Yes.
Yeah, but you don't know whether Jung actually himself worked directly with Pauli.
As far as I know, Jung never worked directly with Pauli.
Okay, so
he had contact with Pauli, of course, to scientific researcher. As two scientific researchers, Pauli and Jung had contact, but he never analyzed with Pauli. He sent Pauli to somebody else in another town.
Oh, okay. That's what I want to know. Thank you.
Lucy, would you like to unmute yourself?
Hi. Hello. Thank you so much. This was such a moving experience. I'm really grateful for this time with you and to share something so personal of someone that I don't know very much about, but and I'm really looking forward to it. And I see the way I understood the biography piece of it is that it can't really be put to words. It would not be enough, the amount of interaction that happens in that space. So I could see how that would be so challenging to put so much of yourself out there. Could not be enough to put in words, or giving it a scientific meaning would reduce it to something. And it's so untangible. So thank you. I'm just moved by it so much. I appreciate it. And I want to get to know her more. This is such a window to an opportunity for more. So thank you.
Thank you. Jung was once, Jung was against the foundation of Jung Institute in Zurich. He was against the foundation of the Jung Institute in Zurich. He didn't want to have an organization. I'll talk about that later on. And he never ever lectured on his own institute in Küsnacht. He never lectured there. But from time to time he appeared. And at that time there were 10 or 15 students. And so they stopped the lectures and they gathered around Jung, and so they could ask Jung some questions, and Jung gave answers. And a friend of mine who knew Jung and who was one of the students at that time told me the following story. One of the students asked Jung, what do you mean by love? And Jung was hesitating to give an answer. And after a while he said, you know, love is to give credit. And if you can't give credit anymore to somebody, then love is over. And you always have to ask yourself, have I enough fortune to give credit? Can I give credit? I mean, of course, he didn't mean it literally. He meant it psychologically, of course. I think this is quite a good thing. And at one point, Jung said, I stopped talking about love because love is reaching from the highest height of heaven till the darkest abyss of hell. And in love is very opposite. I stop pondering over what love should be or what love is. But one thing we can say, and this is, I think, important, love is unique in biology. There is mammals, they have instincts and have drives, but love from soul to soul is unique in humans. And of course, there is between men and women are unsurmountable opposites. Men and women are two completely different beings. And opposites per se can't be united forever. Otherwise, they wouldn't be opposites. But they can be united punctually. And the mean to unite these opposites is love. And this is unique in humans.
Ethan, would you like to unmute yourself?
Thank you. Dr. Etter, you mentioned, I think you said you were asking von Franz what she thought the maybe the most important or biggest part of this shadow was for humanity. And she said something along the lines of the problem of inflation. And I was just wondering, you know, now 23 so odd years after her death, if you share the same view or if you see the answer differently now from your perspective.
Everybody who is trying to deal with his own unconscious is confronted with something much bigger than the ego. And as soon as we start to identify with this much bigger unconscious, we are in danger of inflation. And the biggest danger of inflation is to become completely unconscious. Because when we are inflated, we are only interested about our past, our present, and our future. And we are not related anymore to our surrounding. So dealing with the unconscious means to be humble, to realize it's not the ego, it's not me, it's a gift from the unconscious. What I'm able to say, what I'm able to write, what I'm able to paint, what I'm able to, whatever I'm doing, it's not me, it is the unconscious. I'm just a transmitter of something greater. So it is absolutely important that we stay humble. And von Franz stayed humble. And I mean, she knew who she was, she knew it, but she stayed humble. If somebody is inflated, I was asking once von Franz, what can I do with somebody who is inflated? If I know somebody who starts to be inflated, what can I do? She said to me, there's only one thing, blow him up till he will explode. And then he will come down back to earth. It's difficult to know exactly what it means in reality. But we can't fight inflation, it's impossible. We just can turn away or perhaps blowing him up. I mean, we have many good examples of inflated people. I mean, what do we hear in radio performances, television? What we hear is always a comment from an extroverted man or woman who are inflated enough to tell what they want to say. So we are constantly confronted with people who are one-sided extroverted and more or less inflated. And this is a danger. Von Franz once told me, if I had a lecture, I mean, of course, when we decide to give a lecture, we have to be a little bit inflated, otherwise we wouldn't give a lecture. And von Franz told me she never could, after lecture, she never could go with a group of people and have a beer together or a glass of wine or a cup of coffee after the lecture. She never could do that, never in her life. She always had to go home and be for her alone, for her to stay in her bedroom and just be alone. And she told me she always thought I might be a little bit neurotic, that I can't do that. And when she was quite old, she had a dream and she saw herself as a natural woman in the wood, alone. And after this dream, she told me, she realized this is her nature. She just can't be together with people too long. She is too introverted. She's not neurotic, she is introverted. That's her nature. And she was very grateful of this dream. She started to understand. And beforehand, she had the idea, I'm neurotic. I can't do that because I'm neurotic. What we miss, in fact, is the comment of introverted people. But they rarely speak out. They can speak out very well if they are together with one or with two people, perhaps, under 4 eyes or perhaps under 6 eyes. An introvert can speak out absolutely perfectly. But as soon as there are groups, greater groups, it's impossible. And this new possibility to meet people over Zoom is a great advantage for all the introverts. they can sit at home in their office, secure, and have their familiar situation around them. And so it's easier for them to be a little bit extroverted, to come into extroversion. And I think something which is very important, and also von Franz told me, when an introverted is asked to present something, the first reaction is no. I made the work, I don't want to present. The work is done, I don't have to present. But if the introvert is presenting, then his presentation is always specially, as in a special way, deep or very valuable or very important. But he only is able to come out and to have a speech or a lecture and then to go back into his introversion. He can't stay there for a longer time. And of course, we need more introverted people, because all we hear from outside is from extroverted people. For example, at school, when the teacher is asking who wants to answer a question, of course the extroverted pupil are answering first, and the introverts they just don't answer. They can't. And after a while, the teacher is calling the parents and saying, listen, your boy, your girl is a little bit neurotic. They never answer. They can't talk. We are in need of introverted people.
Thank you. That was really interesting. Thank you.
Oh, sorry. Yvi, did you have another question?
Yeah, I had a question about the inflation, because I just wonder, you know, in Franz's book, The Archetypal Dimensions of the Psyche, she talks about like the American psyche and how they're so disconnected from their own unconscious due to, you know, being disconnected from the symbols of their culture, from the move. And that basically, like, she references a Mexican man, and he's having dreams of this Aztec god that she happens to have been studying. And then she's like, are you Aztec? And he's like, oh yeah. And even though he wasn't, he was still dreaming of this image, right? And you know, it really, I happened to be reading this at the same time I was listening to this historian, Christopher Latch. He was talking about how there's this specific, he does this whole thing on narcissism in America, and how, you know, you can see it in mothers when they don't even trust their own mothering instinct. And I thought that these were so tied together, of like this inflation, because you're disconnected, you don't recognize the symbols as coming from something greater. And I was just wondering if you had anything to say about that, and if what you think kind of a resolution, because I don't think it's just American. I also think in a more globalized kind of world, it's, I don't know, just if you had any, you know, how to, you know, kind of connect people with that, for people that wouldn't be interested in stuff like this, or what do you think the steps of the world so that there can be kind of less inflation? Because, you know, they say every generation gets more and more, you know, narcissistic.
A couple of years ago, I made an interesting experience in America. I was traveling through the States for about 6 or 7 weeks, and gave lectures on different places. And where I often experienced people, they fetched me when we were driving me to a place, and they were talking in the car, talking and talking and talking and talking. And at one point they said, you might think I'm an extrovert, but in fact, I'm an introvert, but nobody knows it. On and heard that people were very extroverted, they realized it, and they said, but in fact, I'm introverted. And I talked with von Franz about that once, and she said, you know, an extrovert has his most touching experiences in introversion. And the introvert, it has his most touching experiences in the extroversion, in his inferior function. That's the reason why people think, extrovert people think I'm introverted, or introvert people think I'm extroverted, because the most touching experiences they have in their opposite function. Well, of course, I don't know, I can't give you a precise answer to your question, but I guess that extroversion and introversion were once upon a time, 100,000 years ago, equally, there were 50%, more or less 50% of extroverts and introverts, because both functions were needed. And by natural selection, on one place, for example, in the Alps, in the mountains, the introverts are more comfortable. They are living more or less alone. They are in the remote valley. They are dealing with agriculture, with farming, and they are quite happy. And the introverts, they stay there, and then they have extroverted children. After a while, they are leaving and trying to work in the next city or in the next town. So it's a question of selection. That's why Norwegians, Finns, Swedish people are more introverted. They live remote in the remote areas. People along the coasts are more extroverted than people in the interior of a country. So in Europe, for example, all those people who live on the coast, Portuguese, Western France, England, the Dutch people, Danish people, on the coast of Norway, you find more extroverted than introverted people. But in the interior of Scandinavia, you meet much more introverted people than extroverted people. So by the time it became a natural selection. Switzerland is in the center of Europe, and basically Switzerland is an introverted country. We have almost no extroverted politics. We have no. We have almost no. Of course, we have contact with the countries, but we have no an extroverted politic. But we have an introverted politics. America, England, also France, during history, they had very extroverted politics. So it's by the time it became a matter of selection where the introverts were living and the extroverts were living. Introverted people in Switzerland would never, ever leave their country or even leave their valley. And all the Swiss people who immigrated to America were extroverted. An introvert would never immigrate to America, never in his life. Now you mentioned something else, narcissism and inflation, and I can't give you an appropriate answer to that difficult point, but it seemed to be like a pattern of development in our culture, in our general culture, that we have to develop more and more our consciousness. And that means also to develop more ego consciousness, because of course consciousness is related to the ego consciousness. That's the way we gather consciousness by our ego. And by that, the ego becomes stronger and is in danger of being inflated. Von Franz was asking Jung once in a seminar, she was asking, on the one hand side, we have to become more and more conscious. That seems to be a pattern of evolution in our culture. But on the other hand, you say we should develop the insight, the transcendent function. We should be more introverted. We should be more related to our instincts. And that's a contradiction. What's the healthy evolution in that contradiction? And Jung said to von Franz, or said to the people who were listening to his lecture, I don't know the solution. You're right. On the one hand side, we have to consider our instincts to be more related to our roots. On the other hand, we should be curious and develop our consciousness. This is a contradiction. I don't know the solution. But then Jung said, I could imagine, and I think that's a very interesting picture. Jung said, I could imagine that we have to develop into animals again, but into conscious animals. It's not that easy to give an answer to the question, what does that mean to be a conscious animal? But as a symbol, it's very effective, because the point is that instincts relates us always in the best possible way to reality. The instinct is the way how an animal is related to reality. So when we are following the instincts, we are related to reality. And the danger of consciousness is that consciousness can produce magical worlds, fantastic worlds, completely cut off from reality. It's like Jung once said, consciousness is like a magical stick. You can produce in 1 second a magical world, which is completely removed from reality. And this is a danger, of course. This is a danger of consciousness. And this image of a conscious animal is for me a great symbol. By the way, in my opinion, we all started our lives in an introverted way. The first 9 months in the womb of a woman, we are completely introverted. And then when we are born, we start to explore the outer world, and we start to develop anyway, more or less extroversion. But we all started by introversion. So that's the beginning of our life. And the end of our life is also introversion. At the end of our life, we are completely alone. And this is what I experienced. I have not a lot of experience, but I have some experience with dying people. They are not less and less interested in the outer world. And they are more and more related to the inner world. When my grandmother was 98 years old, I was visiting her in the hospital. She broke her hip and had to go to hospital. She never left the hospital anymore. And once I came to visit her in the hospital, and she said to me, "Oh, it's good that you're coming to visit me. Can you go in the attic and fetch my suitcase?" She didn't realize that she's in hospital. She thought she's at home. So she asked me to go into the attic to fetch her suitcase. And I said, "Of course I do it, but why do you need a suitcase?" And she said, "Because I'm going for a trip." And I said, "Wow, alone?" No, not alone. "With whom are you going?" And she said, "Well, I think I go with my parents." She was 98 years old, and her parents had died 30, 40 years ago. So she was completely in an inner fantasy in that moment. So we can conclude that people who are facing her last step to go into the other world, they are more and more introverted. And my godfather was dying. My aunt called me and said, "He's going to die, and if you want to see him, you must come immediately." So I was there with my aunt and my cousin and myself, and my aunt said to my godfather, you have a good diagnosis from the doctor. Tomorrow we will be much better. We're going for a walk, and we will have breakfast together." And he just made like that, just gave a sign, "Stop it, stop that bullshit." And at one point, my aunt asked me if I would like to stay with him alone in the room. I said, "Yes, please." And I was kneeling down behind his bed, and out of the blue, I didn't think about it on beforehand. Out of the blue, I said to him, "I wish you a good trip." And he became calm in that moment. He looked at me, and he was giving a sign to me, "Come closer to me." And I came closer to him, and he kissed me on his mouth. And an hour later, he was dead. So I realized in that moment that he didn't want to talk about tomorrow and about having a coffee and going for a walk. And he was not interested at all in that. And when I said to him, "I wish you a good trip," in that moment, in a way, he realized that I know that he's going for his trip. And we never hugged, we never kissed each other, we never hugged. That was the first and the last time he kissed me. And that was the way he could say, "Thank you." So the last way is always an introverted way. So the entrance and the door to go out of life is an introverted phase. And during lifetime, we have to establish our profession. We have to have children and be married, and we marry a second time, the third time perhaps, and we develop. This is an extroverted phase, but it's just a phase. And Anne McGuire once, I lectured about the typology, and Anne McGuire, the famous friend of Marie-Louise von Franz, she said to me in a private talk afterwards, her impression is that women are basically introverted. Of course, they can be extroverted. Every introverted can be extroverted, of course, for a certain time, in a certain situation. And every extroverted can be introverted. Nobody is only one or the other. But basically, she said to me, I'm convinced this is the fundament of the women's psyche, to be introverted. And if necessary, of course, she can come out and be extroverted, of course. If somebody would be only introverted, he would be autistic, lose the contact to outer reality. And if somebody is only extroverted, he will be hysterical. So all of us, we are both, more or less. I experienced very creative introverted people who were just in a very creative way listening, which was inspiring me. The very introverted listening inspired me. So the introversion is a very, very important function.
Joseph, would you like to unmute yourself?
Yes, thank you. I have a quick question based on what you're saying and what you said earlier moments ago about being an animal because it keeps you closer to your instincts, because consciousness is dangerous. It could let you escape into fantasies. What would you say to someone who has survived trauma and prefers to protect themselves in the fantasy of consciousness because of the dangers of reality? Do they still need to stay close to reality, or is it better to escape somewhere in a fantasy of consciousness?
This is a very difficult question because it's a question which is related to suffering, a lot of suffering. Trauma is something very difficult. And in my opinion, we should talk about personal traumas and collective traumas. Jung talks in his article in 1916 about the collective trauma of the Germans in the First World War, and then after the Second World War in 1945, he writes an article after the catastrophe, and he talks about the collective trauma of the Germans again. And of course, Europe, whole Europe was traumatized after the Second World War, not only the Germans. And when I think about women's life in the 19th century, most of them were just an attribute of man and became hysterical. And they were sent to Sigmund Freud in Vienna. And there were asylums for hysterical women, and women disappeared in these asylums. Hundreds, thousands of women disappeared in these asylums and never came out again because they were diagnosed hysterical. And Freud discovered as the first one, in a scientific way, that this history is a reaction of a hunger of spirit. And he tried to feed these women with spirit. And he said, read and write and paint and make groups of women, and discuss whatever it is. So nourish your spirit. And this was healing. And Freud was the first one who discovered this connection. And you remember when Jung treated Sabine Spielerein in Burghölzli. Sabine Spielerein was the daughter of a Russian daughter, and they came to Zurich because she was hysterical. Sabine Spielerein was hysterical, 20 years old. And they were staying in a hotel which is still running in Zurich. And in the first night, she demolished her room in the hotel completely. And the parents were calling the police, and the police brought her to the Burghölzli. And in the Burghölzli, Jung was then the psychiatrist who took care of her. And he realized, not immediately, but after a while, this is a very intelligent woman. And she needs, her intelligence and her spirit needs to be nourished. And she gave her things to read, and she became his assistant. And they fall in love. And Jung wrote to Freud and said, I treated Sabine Spielerein according to your method of therapy, and it was successful. She's healed, but now I'm sitting in the soup. We are in love. How can I cut this love again? So she then started to study medicine. She finished as a medical doctor. She went to Geneva to be an assistant of Piaget, child psychiatrist, a psychologist. After that, she went back to Freud, to Vienna. She became an assistant of Freud. Then she went back to Russia, and she founded 2 different psychological hospitals. So it was amazing what Jung experienced with probably his first hysterical case. So we talked about the trauma. So many women, if you go back in your families, your grandmothers or your great grandmothers, they all experienced traumas. And this is the history of women. And then you talk about the history of men. This is the history of war. I'm a member of an absolutely outstanding generation. I never experienced the war in my life. But my father, my grandfather, my great-grandfathers, they all experienced at least one war. And a war is a trauma for a man. So we are all collectively, in a way, traumatized. And if an individual trauma is on top of this collective trauma, then it's even much more difficult to heal it. Now, the question you asked, shall we approach the effects, the reality of the trauma, which is behind the trauma, or shall we try to avoid it? I mean, the classical theory method, the classical method is that to approach small step by small step, the trauma, become closer and closer and closer. But every time when we are close to a trauma, the trauma is in danger of exploding again. So sometimes I think we should avoid to trigger the trauma, to talk about the trauma, because every time we talk about it, it's there again. And on the other way, if we can approach a trauma in a secure vessel, so to say, in a secure vessel, that means in a surrounding where the man or the woman who experienced a trauma feels really safe. And safe, I think, it's not only safe in a literal way, but carried by people who can go with the traumatized person and can give him the security of being anyway loved. Then perhaps it's possible to approach a trauma and to heal the trauma at the end, the personal trauma. But this is it's a difficult and very challenging task. I remember Jung, when he was old, saying, I could heal, I'm able to heal a split person. And somebody who has a trauma is in a way a split person. We are all split person, more or less, of course. Individuation means to heal the split. Individuation means unsplit it, from the Latin roots. He said, I could heal, I'm able to heal split person, but it's so exhausting. I only will do it now with relatives because it's too exhausting. To sum it up, I think with traumatized people, we have to be very careful and very loving. And it's a big challenge. And the point is, I mean, you know that from your personal life too, the point is not to understand the traumatized personality, but to respect it. Often we can't understand it. It's impossible to understand it, but we should anyway respect it, whatever happens. You in the US, you are confronted with traumatized people. All the immigrants are traumatized. And we in Europe also. All these boat people coming from Africa, they're all traumatized. There are thousands of traumatized people entering Europe now. Heavily traumatized people, mostly women, traumatized women, but also traumatized men. So this will be a big challenge in the future. All these children, these traumatized children, that become grown-ups at one point. It's a big problem. I get it. I don't want to open up a new chapter, but I get it. As much dreams about the corona crisis as possible. And they all speak of a big change. A friend of mine dreamt that he and a couple of people were gathering together with Jung. And one was asking Jung, is the corona crisis an apocalypse? And Jung said, no, it's not an apocalypse. But a big change is ahead. And this big change, I'm convinced this big change is not the new trauma, it's a healing. once in one night, I dreamt the whole night. There's 2 sentences. One sentence was like that: the corona crisis is a catalyst for change and renewal. And the second sentence was rethink everything. And I think that's what we have to do. And that's why the crisis now is a healing, because we have so many unsolvable problems at the moment. Nobody knows how to solve it. But the crisis could be a healing, not in the sense according to our rational thinking, but in new ways. Nobody knows at the moment. Shall we come to an end?
Yes. I didn't want to interrupt you, but it was very rich and very moving, and I love the quality of the silence that we had. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Etter.
I thank you for this inspiring 2 hours. Thank you very much.